The last type of tissue that we're going to discuss in this chapter is nervous tissue. And nervous tissue is responsible for communicating electrical impulses. Neurons are branching cells, and they have cell processes that can extend a long way from the nucleus, from the cell body. So, what we see here is the cell body, and I'm going to label that for you as the cell body or the soma, and it's where the nucleus is going to be located. So this part here is the nucleus. We see another nucleus shown here, here, and a couple over here. So the cell body is then going to have cellular processes that extend from them. Those are called neuron processes, and there are two forms of those. There are dendrites, which receive information, and axons, which take information away. So the dendrites are neuron processes that receive information, and the axons are responsible for taking away information from the cell body, and they could take that information to another neuron, or they could take that information to a muscle or to a gland. Other cells that we have present in nervous tissue are non-excitable supporting cells. And these non-excitable supporting cells are glial cells. And you'll learn more about the specific types of glial cells when we get to the nervous system and chapter 11. So the function of this tissue is the neurons transmit electrical signals from sensory receptors to effectors, which are muscles and glands. And there's also these glial cells, which are the supporting cells that support and protect the neurons. As you've probably already guessed, they're located in the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves. So at this point, there's very little that you need to know about the nervous tissue because we will have several chapters later in the semester on nervous tissue. There are three different membranes that we need to refer to, the first of which is a cutaneous membrane. And a cutaneous membrane is the skin. It's a dry membrane, and it would be keratinized, stratified, squamous epithelium. And remember, when it is keratinized, it's going to release this, or it's going to have this tough fibrous protein called keratin, which is going to help to protect the body. Remember, non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium is only found inside of the body. We then have a second membrane, which is the mucous membrane, collectively called mucosae, and it is a wet membrane. So we have mucosa of the nose, the nasal cavity, mucosa of the mouth or the oral cavity, which is wet, the mucosa of the esophagus, mucosa of the trachea, as well as the bronchi. So that helps to make sure that, or ensure that that area of the body remains moist. The third type of membrane, we actually talked about it earlier on in chapter 1. These are collectively called serosa, but they are also wet membranes, and they're found only in the ventral cavity. So that's where we talked about them. So within the ventral cavity, remember the ventral cavity can be subdivided into the thoracic cavity as well as the abdominopelvic cavity. And then that can be further subdivided into the abdominal cavity as well as the pelvic cavity. So within the thoracic cavity, remember that's where the heart and the lungs are. There's the serosa is going to be a double layered membrane. And remember that double layered membrane is going to have a little space between it. So surrounding the lungs, we have the visceral pleural, which would be touching the lungs, and then the parietal pleural, which would be superficial to that. Surrounding the heart, we have the visceral pericardium touching the heart, and then the parietal pericardium, which is superficial to that. For the abdominal pelvic cavity, within that, we have the peritoneum surrounding the digestive organs. So there would be the visceral peritoneum directly touching these organs, like the liver that you can see here, the various intestines here. And then superficial to that would be the parietal peritoneum. Now, when we have an injury of some sort, there are several mechanisms to protect the body. There's the stratified squamous epithelium to protect us. There's microvilli, cilia, all kinds of different structures. But when there is damage to that, the state of inflammation has to happen. And the state of inflammation is shown on this slide. So I'm going to zoom in to show you these steps a little more closely. So when inflammation begins, trauma is going to cause the injured tissue cells, the mast cells, and others to release inflammatory chemicals. Those inflammatory chemicals make the local blood vessels leaky, and they allow for white blood cells, fluid, and clotting proteins to come to the rescue. The clotting first seals off the injured area, prevents bacteria, toxins, and other harmful substances from spreading, and the surface of the clot is now exposed to the air and it dries to form a scab. So after step one, we now have a scab. The migrating white blood cells have come in. The next event is to sort of organize that epithelium. So there's regenerating epithelium. The organization is going to restore the blood flow. The clot is replaced by the ingrowth of fragile capillaries, which is the characteristic of granulation tissue. This restores that blood flow, the vascular supply. Fibroblasts are going to multiply and produce growth factors and collagen fibers. When healing is complete, the fibroblasts revert to the resting stage. And then essentially the macrophages are going to get rid of dead and dying cells and other debris. So it's almost like we have a Band-Aid on the damage at this point. The final stage is the regeneration and fibrosis, which leads to permanent repair. Because as you can see, there's a regenerated epithelium now. So that fibrosed area matures, contracts, pulls the margin of the wound together, and as it regenerates, the epithelium thickens under the scab, which then detaches. So there's no more scab, no more Band-Aid, and we have a fully regenerated epithelium with underlying area of scar tissue, and that scar left over may be visible, but the majority of it is gone. So that is going to complete our lectures for Chapter 4. So congratulations, you're done with Unit 1.